The Hittite civilization, which existed in what is today Turkey, is known for the invention of a complex writing system that used a set of cuneiform characters. Spoken Hittite was used as the administrative and official language of the empire and was a lingua franca, or a common language that helped the Hittites communicate with other people in the empire. Hittite arms, iron, grain, and silver flowed during the period of their writings on cuneiform, during the period of immigrations and invasions, and during the 11th and 10th centuries BCE to Assyrio-Cimmerian Hoka Kaska. Cappadocians and Sakians opposed them, but being defeated, the Hittites renounced everything. The definition and understanding of what it means to be a Hittite skilled individual are a result of the monumental research. This is evidenced by the publications in volumes and specialized reviews, as well as frequent reports of conferences organized around them. In the field of ancient history, there are social groups and individuals who have a passion for the Hittites. Some specialists range from trade and economy to tax system, religious life, and history. They investigated the international and interregional relations using multiple research tools, including geospatial analysis, isotopic studies, structural analysis, archaeological discoveries, and iconographic documents. Alongside these specific studies, a group of media doubters has spent the last few years reflecting on television sources. The proposal is to embark on their explorations from the point of view of an incursion into the comprehensive history of Hittites. Geographical and temporal context. The Hittites were a major society in Anatolia, which is in the geographical location of Turkey today. Even though the country has an enviable and unique position in terms of harboring and preserving archaeological heritage, it seems few in the world have a deep and comprehensive knowledge of the Hittite civilization. It is recognized that valuable information can be obtained from different media that are thought to be irrelevant in order to enrich the general knowledge of this issue. For these reasons, ancient history documentaries and their contents were evaluated with a subjective and thematic approach and perspectives in order to engage the audience in the world of the Hittites. The events of the founding of the Hittite state and the society that is generally associated with the name Hittites took place between the second part of the first millennium BC. The region in which the Hittites lived in terms of geographical conditions enabled and supported the formation of various societies at different times. The culture inherited from each other in the valleys and plains separated by the Kızılırmak River and its tributaries is called by different names in different periods. The region, which has been the cradle of society since the beginning of time, was chosen as the settlement area due to its geographical characteristics. Identified as the place where agriculture was first practiced, the fertile ground of the Cappadocian Plateau brought the chance of sedentary life. In addition to that, this region was at an intersection in terms of traffic, transportation, and communication. It was more or less on the trade routes of the ancient world. We have some proof of the first settlers in this region, but the predominant societies and socio-cultural structure have not been fully explored. Our purpose for this period is to focus on the period when societies and civilizations have taken place in the process of pre-Roman Anatolia. Historiography and sources. The historiography of Hittite history is understood to pose a broad range of research questions. To a large extent, these may be grouped around two foci. One, the sources from which our current reconstructions of Hittite history might be drawn, and the methodologies or assumptions which we bring to bear in our use of these sources, and two, a critical engagement with the primary sources for Hittite history themselves. That is to say, a good part of Hittite history might be seen as a retrospective construction based on our present-day understanding of the kinds of societies of which the texts below might be seen to offer evidence. To assess one complicated aspect in early Hittite translations, see Hawkins, 1985, Save. Also Beale, Sluter and Warner 2017 with Zerndorfer 2016a. Here we will often speak simply of Hittite text as, leaving aside matters of genre to which inscription would most often refer. The word seeks to encompass the full range of what, from various vantage points, might be subtitled document, of the kinds of materials that we possess which might be brought to bear on Hittite historical narrative. Texts are the most direct. Written in Hittite, These texts are the product found variously in the capital of the Hittite Empire and its homespun towns and cities, other major urban centers within the empire, non-Hittite settlements and cities, fields, ways, forests, hills and shrines within and without the imperial confines, as well as often found in situ in outlying but affiliated provinces within all but the latest decades of Hittite control. The rise of the Hittite kingdom. The first phase of the kingdom of Hatti is marked by its rulers, who sought to consolidate its social power and protect its regions, which were threatened by army invasions from various political powers. In addition, new institutions were also established, including the Luwian writing system, to facilitate direct administrative control over the Kars River route. This policy resulted in conflicts with powerful indigenous cattle breeders to the south, as well as powerful indigenous groups in southeast Anatolia. The stronghold of some of the high-ranking Hattians in the Nenevele area, in particular Mukis, discovered on the Karaharpa site, was destroyed by fire not long before the Great Fire that has been connected to the apparent abandonment of Kiskuvali on the Carcamus Mound. Shortly after the end of this phase, a new arrangement was made for the administration of the region, and following the consolidation of the route defended by these new forts, the great city of Hattusa was prepared as a power center in a reduced kingdom without a local ruler. By then, at the latest, the Hittites and their Hattian-speaking predecessors had revealed their full talent and power, creating a kingdom centered in the inner North Anatolian city of Hattusa that would soon control a swath of land spanning the entire breadth of Anatolia. Yet this late success was built on earlier groundbreaking developments, as indicated by the fact that from the last quarter of the third millennium, some eponyms living in and around Kiskuvali, but also as far south as the Luwian-speaking centrum of Samos at Kusara, stated in their personal slabs that they held different offices in cuneiform. Hatti, often in combination with the second title of Hurrian origin, that there was a Hattian-speaking people living on the Kiskalesi while a diplomat from Kiskuvali worked for the Samos governor. Early Hittite history. At the core of the early history of the Hittites is the people group of the Hattians on the central Anatolian plateau in Asia Minor. There were Hellenic peoples around the Hatti, but even these primitive Hellenic groups could survive only to the northwest, west and southwest of the Hittites. Since new discoveries suggest that Hattian culture corresponds almost exactly with Hattian language and that Hatti began to disintegrate as a cohesive culture, almost as soon as the Hittite dynasts began to dispossess them after 1800 BC, it will be a central concern of us to study the Hittite and Hattian wars. When the Hattians fought for their own capital and the Hittite dynasty, although they were politically destroyed forever, some of their autonomous freedom was secular enough to prevent the Hittites from establishing martial law until around 1590. Nevertheless, the occupation of Hattian city-states and lands left on uplands or on the west coast of the near-abundance III dynasty, skills or classical spirit, society, culture, religion or crafts and trades did not disperse and characterized the next 5.5 centuries. The very earliest resident in Hattusis was a non-Indo-European people, probably descended from the site's Neolithic inhabitants. After the apparent disappearance of this population by around 2500 BCE, there is a gap of about 4 centuries before the mother house of Pithana and Anita came in and made a hostile takeover of one of its most important cities. Syrian culture, however, was preserved and practiced by new immigrant family members who remained without proper dominion after Hattushili I killed King Tutsi and later banished his entire clan. The evidence will sustain an accurate view of the political system under the last non-Hittite leaders and will give an account of their relationships with other Anatolian rulers. Our starting point will not begin until 1800 BC for 2 reasons. First, Hattusis was abandoned when entered, and no extant monuments pertain to a similar one, not far distant north and soon after 2500. Second, the second millennium of Asia Minor is so different from the third millennium that it is only now, in our century and not before, can an authentic synchronic account of ancient Anatolian history be given. Hittite society and culture. The Hittite kingdom is largely patronymic. Rulers come from established noble families and inherit their kingdom. Rulers were considered mortal avatars of gods on earth. Most of these successive kings left records and official seals for us, which helped dramatically in the reconstruction of a long, complex political history. Reaction to war in Hittite society does not often come to public view. The ideology in purified Hittite texts suggests that the task of kings and armies was to protect their subjects from harm. Various Hittite kings at different times exercised enormous regulatory sway. This control also entailed the management of the royal workshops. Kings ordered changes to the government, such as the acquisition of lands and sales of goods, and were the main distributor of labor, both free and constricted. Between the king and personal service and local officials, the king oversaw all aspects of law and personal life. The history, mythology, rituals, cults, and state status and government processes in Hittite society could be seen in the long drive to clarify ideology and to incorporate said data into the Hittite corpus by appendices. The local state in mythology and religion was also characterized by the hierarchy of the gods. Central to this is the myth of handover to the stomach, which, with changing accents and cultic outcomes, reflects the fundamental balance of power. Focusing on the elite and the gods, it was also demonstrated above. Hittite society, dead and human, practicing and writing, seemed mainly interested in the elite and the gods. Like economics, the economy was predominantly visible in its higher ranks, which were substantially above. Political structure and governance. The so-called Hittite kingdom, around 1650 to 1200 BC, represents the main political force in Anatolia and the close Middle East for a long period. Its written records are not voluminous or equally well distributed in time, yet the discovered materials give some idea of how its internal policy must have been organized. Apparently, the word used for a territory administrative unit in the Hittite cuneiform has to be land, Nyanza, and an inhabited place where predominantly indigenous people lived is referred to as a town, Hadzi. The most successful and influential administrative center is Ahiyawa, alias Wilusa, the latest capital of the Hittite kingdom. The Hittite society did not form one huge polity, but a number of smaller and larger regional units. Therefore, it is important to understand what a kingdom was in ancient Anatolia, how a political order could have been possible without a professional military, and whether the Hittite presence in northwestern Anatolia gave a unitary character to this part of Anatolia in the late Bronze Age. The progress achieved in Anatolia, but also in neighboring areas, is largely connected to the development of the warrior aristocracy societal system, which took various shapes in space and time. This chiefdom, as it is usually referred to, especially from Mesopotamia towards northwestern Anatolia, has many features reflecting a hierarchical organization of society, which has been especially influential in the Eastern Mediterranean in the late Bronze Age. Religion and mythology were integral to the Hittite civilization. They likely practiced a polytheistic form of religion, which included human ancestry, or at least elite ancestors that were thought of as gods. Ancient sources mention the ancestral character of gods, such as the storm god or the goddess Hebat. Essene graves found at the ancient Hittite capital of Hattusa contain pottery that can be dated to approximately 1000 BC. Among these were a number of unique vessels with Eastern parallels, like those from Tepehuayuk and Sos Hoyuk. These vessels are similar to the double pitcher goblets mentioned in ancient texts as having been used in ritual libations at Hanigalbat. This is consistent with the representation of Hittite ritual in the material record and in depictions found at Hattusa and Kusakli Hoyuk that portray feasting, which likely went on for several days. The elaborate ritual recordings in contemporary cuneiform texts caution against assuming that what took place at Ebla provides a precise match to earlier Hittite religion. However, the continuity in certain religious concepts and rituals suggests that religious beliefs did not change substantially during the 4 centuries in which we somewhat lack archaeological evidence. A stone stela on the south slope of the citadel from the late 13th century, known as the Sphinx Gate, offers important information on Hittite mythology in its formal dedication to the great sun goddess of Arina, wife of the weather god. Daily life and economy were central to the Hittite civilization. Hittite lilerin gunluk yasami ve ekonomizi. In fact, the bourgeois character of Hittite civilization and its stability also played a role in rural areas. In the highlands and rural regions, serene lives were led away from the center. In this film, despite the use of the term slaves, these seem to be servants, not slaves. Commercial agreements are made by drinking beer. People took care of their personal appearance and worshipped their own low-level earth deities. Later, an important administrative agreement will be made between Hattusili III and Rastupini SSU, or Suzu meaning south in the Hittite language, king on their northern border. In the documentaries, there are visual shares showing the temples, the stone bridge arch, which is the only surviving keshi or supervisor system of the ancient Near East world, tombs, dam-like objects on the Kayapotu foot, the city and the rural atmosphere. The gold diadem found in the tomb of a queen was included in the film. Costume is also mentioned. The short haircut worn by the men shows how convenient and useful their daily life is. Both the texts and the images reveal that the Hittite people worked in the field, fed crops, sowed crops with broadcast seeders made of wood and soil, herded, stock breeding, and fished. The girls stayed at home with their mothers and learned to make bread and dumplings. They also allowed the giants to ride the donkey carts and have fun. Syro-Hittite women acted as musicians. According to texts, bread, fruit and milk were sent as gifts from wealthy people to workers during work. Various annual festivals were organized in the cities. The bread and drink to be distributed and the names of the country companions were written from the agricultural regiments to the palace and then to the temples. Pot instructions were sent to the provinces. Religious and social aspects of the Hittite state, especially the Babylonian economy, which is destined to be poor and is in the background, will be the subject of a separate criticism at the end of this introduction. Hittite military and warfare. In terms of military organization, we have the basic military unit, the so-called Anen, which represented some sort of a subgroup of the Huasi unit. Many other military functionaries or specialists are attested, such as the officers in charge of the charioteers or the elite squadrons of charioteers, of which we know some isolated cases, such as Pankusili offline. Similarly, the Hittite army evidently thought highly of their scouts and of intelligence work overall, since so many examples of in former years reconnaissance expeditions into the enemy country are known. Apart from the scouts, we also hear about advanced detachments called Manuman. On the other hand, it could be possible that the epigraphic evidence contains only about 1% of the documents. The position of the soldiers was very much in line with the position of the peasants in the Hittite kingdoms. The so-called Panku soldiers, who served as charioteers in the king's army, had to have their own estate, and besides themselves could have vassals and slaves belonging to Bekanum, strong ones or weak ones. Since many Hittite texts dealt with the estates and the rights and responsibilities of their holders, whose main owner was the king, many sources inform about the social and economic background of the soldiers as well. It is very interesting, however, that concerning the daily life in the army, the Hittite tablets do not tell us much in contrast to the situation in Mycenaean and Neo-Assyrian society. These operational parts deal with accession treaties, the erosion of the kingdom and the city, the governance and the ruler. Military organization and tactics. The Hittite military establishment has a number of unique features, mostly shared with other branches of the state bureaucracy. At the foundation of the entire state and military organization is the concept of hierarchical arrangements, which inevitably form the basis of official relations between the members of personnel. In the case of the Hittite army, these are the relations between the king as the military commander-in-chief and the three major strata of executive military officials. The high commanders of the national suzerain vassal troops were vassals of the first layer. The commanders heading the contingents of the same social status were in their own turn vassals of the middle-level administrators. Finally, there was a third, and in this particular case, Rhodian expedition contemporaneously attested Hittite and non-Hittite vassal level that included the chiefs of a number of individual infantry and chariot detachments who were the personal vassals of the viceroy at Karaduniash, the Hittite province in western Anatolia, and the Hittite upper-level commander of all Rhodian forces. In time of war, which could not be foreseen, it was the responsibility of the autonomous military organ. According to Hittite concepts of warfare, the operational foundations were laid by generating fear with a strategy of strategic concentration and the psychological factor of fear. Preservation of human life, war is too important to be left to generals, was a policy suitable for a Hittite civilization that was deeply permeated with the concept of bureaucracy and state centralization. Hittite tactics made minimal use of the automated command and control mechanism. This may be explained by the fact that Hittite warfare was relatively low-tech, with an obvious absence of shock tactics. Campaigns and battles. Once a Hittite king shared his father's treatment plan with an Egyptian pharaoh or attacked the citadel of a neighbor, he was inevitably influenced by military events. Military events had long-term consequences and often shaped Hittite history. Hittite military history has deep roots, extending into the period prior to the founding of the Hittite state and shedding light on the civilization's beginnings, even as it skillfully blended those aspects of beyond Proto-Indo-European Anatolian society with which the West was familiar. It is seen in the context of the development of the surrounding Hittito and Hattito-speaking city-states, pluralities and principalities of second millennium central Anatolia, complemented by the written word in the Old Anatolian language. It is a blend of ethnic factors described in monumental inscriptions and the professional and social knockout rounds of the curly Hittite factual method and grey-up, rather demoralizing court chronologicalist texts. The word is best known from Hittite sources. The Hittite early kingdom, born out of the nature of the late third millennium, or third born, was marred by wars and conditioned by military events marred by wars worldwide. The foreseeable method and social were determined by military events with a greater mass with upper and wide agreeing parts. The first and fourth closing to be carried out, that first morbid political violence, then Hittite invasions and the Mitannian campaigns. The type and discussed her illnesses, retiring to the chamber, praying to the gods, seeking help from powerful gods and powerful kings, and sending wealth from rich it then have developed but are still regarded as more fruitful. Even in the most bloody details, the military tactics and plans no longer aroused the same interest as in previous warfare. The more it avoided, the more impressive that the city, before being swallowed by the Persian Empire it had brought an end, blossomed once in the mid-second millennium, had studied. Limping from a meeting to a palace image with geopolitical footprints and ulterior motives, DocuHD scanned the small-scale perspective and depicted the beginning, middle and end of Hittite civilization. Hittite art and architecture. Art is an expressive form of human endeavor. One can scarcely get to grips with the essence of an artwork once architecture, sculptures, ceramics, and every kind of human artifact such as clothing, arms, vessels and furniture are considered to be works of art. Such is the case with the Hittites. In analyzing the Hittite art in all its aspects, one issue stands out above all others, viz. The scantiness of the remains. But for the fortuitous discovery of Hattusa, the queen of all cities, one would reign supreme in the memory of humankind. This discovery was the key that unlocked the door to the slowly revealed wonder of the Hittites, that source of endless discovery over the past 75 years. The Hittite sources are useful for discerning the axis on which their state was founded and the direction in which it moved. Of the Hittites' art and architecture, their architectural genius is the most striking. Like Anatolian art in general, Hittite art was the product of innovative artistic creations without being dependent on borrowed foreign influences. They crafted objects which were then imbued with Hittite spirit. Some items were fashioned according to prototype models of proclaimed bilateral nature of Central Asian orientation, thereby predating the Minoan attempts. The pots in question were manufactured using a potter's wheel, which did not arrive in Crete until the turn of the Trojan War. could well indicate that developments such as these are a derivative coming to terms with early Cretan presence in the eastern Aegean islands. A range of styles in Hittite art is indicated by little statues, ceramic display jars, more commonly crafted copper weapons, and even an index indicating lithic language. Architecture, sculpture, and especially relief carving were vehicles for royal propaganda, enhancing the power and wealth. One of the mysteries which is not clear about the Hittite kingdom is the reasons behind the collapse of the Hittite kingdom between 1200 and 1180 BC. The same mystery relating to the decline of Mycenaean Greek has puzzled historians for centuries. Currently, it is mostly accepted that climate changes and the attacks of the Sea People, like many old explanations, played the most important roles in the collapse of the political powers of the Eastern Mediterranean. Firstly, one can claim that the political collapse of the Hittite kingdom is also resulted from internal problems. According to this view, the pressures created by the Casca on the border and the frequent changes of the kings during the reign of Tudhaliya IV weakened the army's morale and the citizens' confidence towards the government. An anti-government group within the country rose with the pressure of the archivist and ultimately weakened the power of the state. However, even after the collapse of the political power, the Hittite kingdom continued to exist until 710 to 700 BC, although the capital was changed several times. The Tudhaliya dynasty, however, continued, which ruled the eastern part of the collapsed Hittite country. The Neo-Hittite principalities were also established on the territory of the Hittite kingdom. Such is Tabal Kingdom in the northwest, in western Anatolia, Pisidia, Lithuania, and the Arzawa country in the southwest. On the border with Ugari, it is also known that Damati, the last king of Ugar, was a Hittite ally at the beginnings of the first millennium. These new country units tried to capture the richness of the region and became powerful. Hence, the question for us is why? If the Hittites have a long history of stability, do they ultimately decline as a culture? In order to do this, we will need to look into the internal as well as external causes that precipitate this decline. It appears that following the death of Muwatalli II and the later sacking of Hattusa by the Assyrians in 1200 BC, neither the political nor the military elite in the region is able to maintain a stable Hittite government. There are a list of possibilities that may have caused this shift in political power and success. They may have included, but are obviously not limited to, internal revolts and political strife within the Hittite Empire, prolonged drought, waves of death from widespread plague, and the military invasion and subjugation by additional nations, which in turn appears to have advanced other nations to an overall ethno-political advantage within the region. If most of the powerful families in the country were to lose members of their families or whole kinship bonds, any given nation would have experienced the same social results as political strife. Furthermore, it would be expected that the age demanded for military service had been compelled to provide military service at an earlier time, thereby further dividing society at large. Furthermore, the Hittite military was comprised of the same groups by those who were about a year too old or a year too young to be involved in the war effort. Lacking these normal societal duties would provide a motivation and incentive to peasants seeking freedom to engage in political revolt against their masters and service leaders. The fingerprint of Hattusa was very deeply etched, not only in Asia Minor but all across the ancient Near East. Ancient Aryavarta, the Ganga Yamuna Doab and beyond, stands testimony to the inevitability of contact. So it is here, on a handful of clay tiles from Narden, that we have to begin telling the story of Hittite diplomacy, and where at the beginning of a long hall decorated with 5 lingas we encounter in relief how Hittite-India relationships were plotted and how those felt along the timeline, and also of their disguises. The Hittites were the butlers of history, and they were effective and have been famously referred to by the epithet Caesar of Thrones. They may not have designed the pathways of the future, but in some deep, irreducible, covenantal way, the essence of their story lies along almost every main historical current of ancient times in Asia Minor. the Trojan War, the fibers of inceptions of demotic art, Mesopotamia, an awakening under Cyrus, and at the opportune moment of Greece. Their ingenious prayer texts unerringly captured the perennial essence. We find enough in Hittite annals, in Hittite correspondence, in Hittite treaties, in Hittite epics, in Hittite wisdom texts, in Hittite ritual texts, in Hittite non-fiction tales, divination, medicine, tragedy, renaissance, dance, astonishment, in Hittite secret recipes, Hittite protocols, etc., that reflect the enunciation or the representation of a webbed archive of a Hittitology-soaked Asian environment. During the heydays of the Hittites, travelers' reports confirm that Hattusa was a major city and that the empire was a wealthy one. In the Middle East, the Hittite Empire was a major player on the stage of international politics. Often Hittite ambassadors, merchants and soldiers, some of whom we come across in the Old Kingdom city of Gordian, can be found in places far beyond Hattusa. Excavations at Miletus, Numrud, Babylon, Persepolis and Lagash have yielded Akkadian, Luwian, Hittite, cuneiform writings. In the mid-19th century, European scholars, primarily German and British, Austrian to some extent, started making sense of these rich sources, and a veritable volume of cuneiform texts, not all under Hittite control but from the whole region, began to appear in publication. And it is that Asapur Annam, by a quasi-miraculous craniable adaptation to adventures across 100 generations and half the old world, has become apprehensive to us, to the maiden of the 21st century. To the laity of the third millennium, the Hitkalian universe is quite alien, odd, remote, archaic, impenetrable, and yet pervasive. We discern them with foreshadowing exercises of depth and scope. In recent years, historians of the ancient Near East have revisited ancient texts and Hittite history in the pages of major publications. Recent studies demonstrate the many ways researchers continue to dispute and debate the evidence and modern interpretations. Scholars continue to interpret available evidence to understand both individuals and events. Popular works from many fields have attempted to explore the world of the Hittites and their descendants. While some suggestions, for example those presented in a television mini-series, remain grounded in older paradigms, others reflect the ways that post-processual understanding of human societies of the deep past has changed. As a last chapter in the text, a quick overview of the changes in Hittite archaeological research would be in order. Since the date the original lecture was written and given, a number of exciting finds and new studies have come to light. The publication strand of the BOF has undergone several changes, and new studies have provided fresh insights into more recent aspects of the Hittite state and society. In the field of Hittite legal studies, these more recent extractions and secondary exploitations of content generally occur through study of the laws and their supposed juridical attitudes. Discrimination based on known class differences and empirical evaluation of these normative and informal attitudes to people would provide more accurate reconstructions of Hittite social reality. The lack of corroborating evidence from the social and economic perspective also makes these partial legal insights unsound bases for historiographical reconstruction. Archaeological excavations. In recent years, there has been a tendency for our knowledge of Hittite history and material culture to cease to be based on the interpretation of texts and to be based directly on the findings of archaeological excavations. As it is known, recently excavations of the Hittite capital Hattusa have provided us with very important new data. This kind of information has allowed a comparative study of the ideology of Midas's monuments in the territory of Phrygia and the monuments of the late Bronze Age imperial society, which is extrinsic to Greece, that is Hittite and Egypt, in terms of art. Sites like Kusura, Kanlitus, and part of Eskiapar have brought new data back to the vast ideological relics like Kaman Kalehoyok, which borders the old Hittite capital of Hattusa, regarding topics in the older Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age. Traditional and new studies on the history of old excavations like Zorpinar Kultepehan Liktepe, Ali Mesit Yesilova Kultepehan Liktepe have presented material and spiritual culture from the old Assyrian colonies of central Anatolia with a completely different understanding of the first idea. It is now seen that the region towards Kanesh in the old Assyrian period also had a written civilization in the west and in the south, in the lower and upper Kizilirmak valleys, probably 1,000 years before the old Assyrian period, and Hittite culture had an advanced art image. After recent rescue excavations and excavations of some settlements, the number of Hittite period site settlements mentioned above was increased by approximately 40%. Scholarly debates regarding the Hittite problem in modernist terms and fashions form the cornerstone of our interpretative framework today, even if only as a point of departure. A notable example of this is the epigenetic nature of the archives of the great kings of the Hittites that were discovered in Bogazkoy, modern name Hattusa. How are we to interpret the idiosyncrasies of the ancients who chose these tablets? While investigators once sought respite from the confusion in the arms of ethnic primordialism, it has been convincingly argued that we are not justified in imposing anachronistic beliefs about the sanctity of textual traditions onto past actors. These enigmas are unlikely to be solved, but they invite relatively more profitable methods of investigation. We can buttress our attempts to understand the tablets, if not the scribes, with auxiliary texts from neighboring polities, non-complementary textual genres in Hittite studies, for example the Chamber 2 Quorum Sealand texts or ritual philological, archaeological and epigraphical investigations, adduce ample data to construct a comprehensive history of the Hittites. The range of interpretative theories, oppositions, lineages and approaches with which we can approach the study utterly dwarfs a list of this nature. Parcuta est differentia, charge 2015, but the rendering of such debates, at least in broad strokes, is useful not least because it can shed light into some of the politics that has shaped the development of Hittite studies. Ultimately, the exportation of this constructed history via the medium of the ancient history documentary grants us an idea of the reception of the Hittites beyond the disciplinary confines of the field and potentially outside of the academy into the public sphere. In this case, scholars and non-specialist audiences alike are tacitly encouraged to seek sensorial connections. One might say suggests Lebron, an empathetic bridge between the ancient polities and a presentist framework in which modern publics can locate themselves. Ancient history documentaries between the late 1970s and today triggered renewed interest in Hittite history, and thus in the early Iron Age Eastern Mediterranean. They are also relevant as they do not cover Hittite history alone, but demonstrate the popularity of certain interesting aspects of it. Such documentaries are misleading too. The first problem is focused on the lack of scientific accuracy. However, people are not foolish to buy an oversimplified history of so many interconnected themes that are still being widely debated, just because it arrives at them through an ancient drama or fantasy. They must be really passionate about ancient history. The second problem is the more important one. One cannot cover the Hittites, over 1,300 years filled with so many different events, by showing the fictional events of a cartoony Hittite society fighting and making treaties, nor concentrate only on the city of Hattusa of the years around 1290 BCE for 2 hours. The Hittites are so complex, the result of the meeting of so many different cultures and people, that one should always use more than 2 hours at least to deal with them. Recent developments in visual media have led to an increased interest in history documentaries. Although documentaries cannot provide a full guide to a subject, they can function as a door opener, allowing an access point to a subject. They reach a significantly higher audience because of their visual characteristics and provide a specific narrative. Documentaries are popular sources of ancient history in particular, and can be used as tools to lead the public through a culture-related topic because of their visual value. One of the main issues with ancient Anatolian civilizations is the lack of comprehensive historical popularized overviews. In this context, documentaries about the Hittites seem to provide the main source, as the majority of documentaries produced refer to the Hittites in ancient Anatolia. The impact of iconic figures such as Melart and Bryce seems to have a direct impact on the narratives presented in these documentaries. This work will analyze the Hittite documentaries in order to shed light on the narrative strategies used in the popularization of the Hittites. Additionally, the work will explain the main topics addressed by documentaries on the Hittites in ancient Anatolia. Accuracy and limitations of documentaries will also be discussed. This chapter critically evaluates the portrayals of Hittite history found in ancient history documentaries. It addresses issues of accuracy and the limitations that result from the audio-visual medium. Documentary films are logically written for an audio-visual medium, a medium that could be argued as the opposite of a critical one that requires reflection rather than immersion. Thus, they make ideological use of aesthetics and narrative principles. Unlike text, images, scenes, and sounds may be difficult to bring into a relationship with each other, especially when contexts change faster than the camera can adjust, and demand aggressive editing to enable psychic and emotional processing. In addition, a full two-thirds of this volume traverses periods before the Hittites' prominent rule in Anatolia and the Near East. And since this is a narrative history, it will also extend far beyond the classic Hittite Empire's decline. Accuracy versus creative crises. Documentaries written today that incorporate the most advanced scholarship of text history and archaeology, impossible to draw conclusions from, are said to express the latest in scholarship and to provide innovative interpretations. Yet, the moment they have been broadcast, the experts disseminating this new thinking have set up websites and social media sites critiquing one another, as well as the problem presented by the media. Already a new wave of scholarship provides the above-mentioned tensions with an out-of-date edge. How much more is one expected to expect a film scripted over 20 years ago to be out of ideas? More reasonably, then, it can only be asked merely to be as accurate as the current state of the question. However, this is already impossible. Over 20 years, most views have changed, and the state of access and site management on all scales was the dissemination and sharing of the visualization of ancient Anatolia for the first time. Conclusion and future directions. This volume has set itself two, possibly three goals. First, to provide academics and laypersons with a comprehensive guide to the Hittite Empire. This ancient Near Eastern state lasted more than 5 centuries, from around 1600 to 1180 BC, and controlled vast territories. Yet despite having such high potential for appeal to the general public, there is no comprehensive and concise history of the Hittite Empire based on up-to-date research written in English. The chapters have further offered insights into the history of the Hittite Empire that allow for engaging storytelling. This volume is also a narrative of research into critical historical questions relevant to the Hittite Empire, namely, connections with the Mycenaean palaces and the mysterious nature of the tradition known as the King's Mirror. Secondly, or can be, the methodological insights from this volume. The short history is often portrayed as banal, an entry-level form of writing in which complexity, debate, and nuance are abandoned. However, the chapters in this volume indicate that short histories are more complex, require more attention to change and argument, and can contribute exciting and innovative work to wider areas of history. Despite these insights and provocations, short histories do not often warrant their own research monograph due to their purpose and the role they are perceived as having in wider historical writing. However, some chapters did touch upon ideas that could have expanded into further research. There are currently a number of other questions that could be of relevance to future research into the history and archaeology of the Hittite Empire. First, a plethora of studies exists on the imperialists. This volume offers some discussions of the experiences of crime, gender, and illness. However, it has not touched upon the history of childhood, old age, or family, nor introduced discussions on absolute rulership, the functioning of law in large states, or broader discussions on resistance to imperialism. This volume therefore offers some new historical questions to research if a subsequent volume is to be put into effect. Key takeaways from the comprehensive history of the Hittites. The research, published in the prestigious journal Humanities, focuses on two TV documentaries which provide the comprehensive history of Hittites from their rise as the regional power to their collapse at the end of the Bronze Age 3,500 years ago. Both documentaries were part of the primary data set, which was used in a large cross-disciplinary project, Cognitive Archaeology in Action, led by Dr. Mihaly Hopal. The primary goal of the project was to explore the potential of audiovisual media in disseminating new knowledge about the human past. The researchers discussed and analyzed the different perspectives on the Hittite civilization as the program offered and people's reactions to them. The comprehensive history of the Hittites, presented in the two documentaries, reinforced many of the international and national scholars' findings in elite academia in the last century. Nevertheless, occasionally the program's experts made remarks that were in line with recent and even own research findings, challenging and reconceptualizing traditional perspectives shared by most of their colleagues worldwide, while incorporating new evidence from other disciplines. 52-year-old Estonian female historian Kristin Kopra, head of the research group and the research project More Than Human Histories, which is the part of the larger Centre of Excellence in Ancient Near Eastern Empires, ANE team, led by Principal Investigator Professor Jason Silverman and hosted by the University of Helsinki, focusing on historical, religious and cultural studies in Anatolia and its neighbours over 3,000 years ago, participated in the study as a discussant. Potential areas for further research. This chapter is already relatively long, so finalization will be in the following section. Here we briefly outline a number of unresolved questions and indicate areas for future research. Scholars are already beginning to pilot some of these ideas, particularly in the realm of digital humanities and in terms of sustainability and resilience. For now, however, the overall area of post-collapse Hittite studies remains largely uncharted territory. Recurring themes throughout the chapter have included the relationship between the Neo-Hittites and their Hittite and Aramaean neighbors, the integral role of Manda relocations, and the centrality of post-collapse scripts and literacy in defining the Hittite tradition. Ultimately, the most appropriate legacy of the Hittite tradition may be that of their rich documentary legacy. The prices of living sustainability, resilience, and peak everything. Else what can the comprehensive history of the Hittites offer a general reader? Here we have suggested several potential areas for further research, yet it has not been our intention to lay out the recent history of Hittitology as it were. A decade after Bryce's monumental survey, it is fitting, therefore, to review the comprehensive approach to the Hittites and to indicate some areas of focus in the new millennium. While all 29 papers demonstrate the far-reaching potential of a comprehensive Hittite history, the logistical difficulties in organizing 29 scholars located around the world prevent stressing a new emphasis or direction of Hittite scholarship. Curious about the ancient world?